Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Photograph. Scott Frank set down his coffee mug and reached for the leather-bound wedding album Shannon had left on the kitchen counter. 3 years of marriage, and he still smiled at their wedding photos. His wife's radiant face beamed back at him from every page. The happiest day of their lives, or so he'd thought. The front door chimed, and Stephen Flynn's familiar voice echoed through the house. "Scott, you decent?" In the kitchen, Scott called back. Stephen had been his best friend since college, where they'd bonded over late-night philosophy debates and shared dreams of making the world better. Stephen had chosen federal law enforcement. Scott had built a successful consulting firm specializing in corporate security. Both paths had served them well, though Stephen's recent early retirement at 42 had raised questions Scott never pressed. Stephen appeared in the doorway, his weathered face breaking into a grin. Despite being the same age, Stephen looked older, a consequence of 15 years with the Bureau that he rarely discussed. His salt and pepper hair and alert gray eyes gave him the appearance of someone who'd seen too much. "Shannon at work?" Stephen asked, helping himself to coffee from the pot. "Board meeting today. Some big presentation." Scott turned the page of the album. "Remember this day? You gave the worst best man speech in wedding history." "Hey, I was nervous." Stephen moved closer, glancing at the photos over Scott's shoulder. "That was a beautiful ceremony, though." Shannon looked. Stephen's words died mid-sentence. Scott felt his friend's body tense behind him. "What is it?" Stephen's finger pointed to a photo of Shannon with her bridal party. 5 women in elegant sage green dresses surrounded Shannon, but Stephen's attention fixed on one particular figure, a striking brunette with sharp cheekbones and an enigmatic smile. "The maid of honor," Stephen said quietly. "Where is this woman now?" Scott studied the photo. Carolina Fitzpatrick, Shannon's college roommate and closest friend. They'd been inseparable during the engagement, but after the wedding, Carolina had simply vanished from their lives. "I don't know. She disappeared after the wedding," Scott replied. "Shannon said she took some job overseas." "What?" Stephen's hand gripped Scott's arm with surprising force. "Take your family and get to a safe house." "Now, what the hell are you talking about? You have no idea who your wife's friend is. If she's gone, it means your wife's cover is blown." The words hit Scott like physical blows. "Cover?" His mind raced, trying to process what Stephen was suggesting. Shannon, his wife of 3 years, the woman who left him love notes in his lunch and cried at romantic comedies. She had a cover? "Stephen, you're scaring me." "What cover?" Stephen's face had gone pale. He moved to the window, checking the street with practiced efficiency. Carolina Fitzpatrick, if that's even her real name, is Katrina Volkov. Russian intelligence. I spent 2 years tracking her before she vanished. Scott's world tilted. That's impossible. She was Shannon's college roommate. They lived together for 3 years at Northwestern. "No, Scott. She's a deep cover operative. If she was close to Shannon, and now she's gone." Stephen turned back to him. "There's only one reason a Russian agent disappears after maintaining a long-term relationship with someone. Shannon was either her target or her handler." The wedding album slipped from Scott's numb fingers. Pages scattered across the kitchen floor, their happy memories now tainted with suspicion and fear. "My wife is not a spy," Scott said firmly, but his voice lacked conviction. Stephen's expression softened slightly. "I hope you're right, but we need to assume the worst. Pack a bag. We're leaving. I'm not going anywhere until I talk to Shannon." "Scott, listen to me." "No, you listen." Scott stood, his analytical mind beginning to work through the shock. "I've been married to this woman for 3 years. I know her. If what you're saying is true, there has to be an explanation." Stephen studied his friend's face, recognizing the stubborn determination that had gotten Scott through their toughest college challenges. "Fine, but we do this smart. No phone call she might trace. We go to her office, we talk to her face to face, and if I'm right about any of this, we disappear immediately." Scott nodded, his mind already racing ahead. If Shannon was hiding something, he'd know. He'd always been good at reading people. It's what made him successful in business. But as he looked down at the scattered wedding photos, a cold realization crept in. He'd never once suspected the woman he loved might be living a lie. Chapter 2. Revelations. Shannon's office building rose 37 floors above downtown, its glass facade reflecting the afternoon sun. Scott had visited dozens of times, but today the familiar lobby felt different, more like entering enemy territory than visiting his wife's workplace. 34th floor, Meridian Financial, Scott told Stephen as they rode the elevator in tense silence. Meridian's a front, Stephen said quietly. I should have realized it sooner. A front for what? Money laundering. We've been watching them for 6 months, but never had enough evidence to move. Stephen's jaw tightened. Your wife's not just involved, Scott. She's running the operation. The elevator dinged at floor 34. Scott stepped out, his legs feeling unsteady. Shannon's assistant, a young man named Ben Becker, looked up from his desk with surprise. Mr. Frank, Shannon's in the conference room with the board. Should I? It's fine, Ben. I'll wait in her office. Scott had been in Shannon's office countless times, but now he saw it through different eyes. The locked filing cabinet he'd never questioned. The second laptop she claimed was for client presentations. The framed photo of them in Prague, a city Shannon had insisted on visiting for their anniversary, claiming she'd always wanted to see it. Prague, home to one of Russia's largest intelligence operations in Eastern Europe. Stephen moved to the window while Scott examined Shannon's desk. Everything looked normal. Family photos, business cards, a half-finished crossword puzzle. Then Stephen's sharp intake of breath made him look up. We've got company, Stephen said. Black SUV, 2 blocks out. They're not trying to hide. Before Scott could respond, Shannon's voice carried from the hallway. She was saying goodbye to someone, her laugh light and familiar. The sound that had once comforted him now made his stomach clench. The door opened, and Shannon stepped inside, her smile faltering when she saw them both. For just a moment, less than a second, Scott caught something in her expression. Calculation. Assessment. The look of someone rapidly processing a threat. Honey, what are you doing here? She asked, recovering quickly. And Stephen, what a nice surprise. We need to talk, Scott said. Shannon's eyes flicked between them, and Scott realized she was reading the room with the same skill he'd always admired in business negotiations. But now he wondered if those skills came from somewhere darker than MBA training. Of course. She closed the door behind her. What's this about? Stephen stepped forward. Carolina Fitzpatrick. The color drained from Shannon's face. Not gradually, all at once like someone had pulled a plug. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant hum of traffic below. I don't know what you think you know, Shannon said finally. I know Katrina Volkov has been your handler for 7 years, Stephen replied. I know Meridian Financial has been washing money for Russian intelligence operations. And I know you've been feeding classified information to Moscow through your husband's security consulting business. Shannon's composure cracked. Scott, you have to understand. Understand what? Scott's voice was raw. That my wife is a traitor? That our entire marriage is a lie? No. Shannon's vehemence surprised them both. Scott, I love you. That was never fake. But everything else was? Shannon moved toward her desk, and Stephen tensed. Don't, he warned. I'm not going for a weapon, Shannon said quietly. She opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a thick manila folder. I've been documenting everything. Every transaction, every contact, every order from Moscow. She held it out to Stephen. I was going to turn myself in. Stephen took the folder, but didn't lower his guard. Next week. I couldn't take it anymore. Tears started down Shannon's cheeks. They threatened Scott. If I didn't continue the operation, they'd kill him. Scott felt the room spinning. How long? How long what? How long have you been lying to me? Shannon's voice broke. Since before we met. I was assigned to get close to you because of your security clearance and client list. But Scott, I swear on my mother's grave, I fell in love with you for real. Everything between us, our marriage, our life together, that's the only true thing in my whole damn life. The conference room door at the end of the hall burst open. 3 men in dark suits emerged, followed by a familiar figure that made Scott's blood freeze. Carolina Fitzpatrick, or Katrina Volkov, walked toward them with predatory grace. She looked exactly the same as in the wedding photos, but now Scott could see what he'd missed before. The cold intelligence behind her dark eyes. The way she moved like someone trained to kill. "Hello, Shannon," Carolina said in accented English. "Time to go." Stephen's hand moved toward his jacket, but Carolina raised a finger. "I wouldn't. My associates have very good aim." "What do you want?" Scott demanded. Carolina smiled, and it was like looking at a beautiful snake. "You've served your purpose, Mr. Frank. Your wife has given us everything we need. Your consulting firm's client database, security protocols for a dozen major corporations, and most importantly, proof that American businesses are far more vulnerable than your government realizes." "The money laundering was just cover," Shannon said quietly. "The real operation was corporate espionage." "Very good," Carolina said, "though I'm disappointed you decided to develop a conscience. It makes things so much more complicated." Scott stepped protectively in front of Shannon. "If you want her, you go through me." Carolina laughed. "How romantic, but unnecessary. We're taking you both." Stephen spoke for the first time since Carolina had appeared. "Actually, you're not." He pulled out his phone and held it up. "I've been recording everything for the last 10 minutes. My former colleagues at the Bureau are already on their way up." Carolina's expression didn't change, but Scott caught the subtle signal she gave to her men. They began moving closer. "You're lying," Carolina said. Stephen shrugged. "Want to bet your freedom on it?" The sound of sirens began in the distance, growing louder. Chapter 3. The Hunt Begins. The sirens were a bluff. Stephen had made no calls, sent no signals. But Carolina didn't know that, and her momentary hesitation was all Stephen needed. "Move!" he shouted, pushing Scott and Shannon toward the emergency exit as he drew his concealed weapon. Carolina's men reacted instantly, but Stephen's years of federal training showed. His first shot shattered the office window, creating chaos and confusion. The second sent one of Carolina's men diving for cover behind a desk. Scott grabbed Shannon's hand and ran for the stairwell. Behind them, gunfire erupted, muffled pops that sent office workers screaming in all directions. "Down!" Stephen's voice echoed in the stairwell as they descended. "Don't stop until we reach the parking garage." Scott's mind raced as they took the stairs 3 at a time. Everything he thought he knew about his life had collapsed in 15 minutes. His wife was a spy. Their marriage was built on lies. And now people were shooting at them. But one thing Stephen had said kept replaying in his mind. Shannon had been documenting everything. If she really was planning to turn herself in, if she genuinely wanted out of this nightmare, then maybe, just maybe, they could find a way through it. They burst into the parking garage. Scott's BMW sat in its usual spot, but Stephen grabbed his arm. "Not your car. They'll have it tracked." He led them to a nondescript gray sedan. Company car. Clean plates, encrypted communications. As they drove out of the garage, Scott saw black SUVs converging on the building. Carolina had called for backup. "Where are we going?" Shannon asked from the back seat. Her voice was small, frightened, more vulnerable than Scott had ever heard her. "Safe house," Stephen replied. "Then we figure out how to keep you both alive." Scott turned to look at his wife. "Is it true? About being assigned to target me?" Shannon nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "I was recruited in college. My father, he had gambling debts to some very dangerous people. They offered to make his problems disappear if I helped them. And you chose to become a traitor. I chose to save my father's life." Shannon's voice cracked. "I was 21 years old, Scott. I didn't understand what I was really agreeing to." Stephen spoke from the front seat. "The folder you gave me, what's in it?" "Everything. Bank records, communication logs, identity documents for at least 30 other operatives working in corporate America." Shannon wiped her eyes. "I've been copying files for 2 years, building a case that would bring down the entire network." "Why?" Scott asked. "Because I wanted out. Because I wanted a real life with my husband instead of this constant fear and deception." She looked at Scott directly for the first time. "Because I love you more than I fear them." Stephen's phone buzzed. He checked it and swore. "Carolina's putting a bounty on your heads. $500,000 each, dead or alive." Scott felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. These people had turned his wife into a spy, threatened their marriage, and now wanted them dead. They'd made this personal. "Stephen, I need you to teach me everything." "Everything what?" how to fight back, how to hunt them instead of running. Stephen met his eyes in the rearview mirror. Scott, these aren't corporate executives you can outmaneuver in a boardroom. These are trained killers. Then we become killers too. Shannon stared at her husband. Scott, what are you saying? I'm saying we end this. All of it. Scott's voice was calm, but Shannon could hear steel underneath. You have documentation that could destroy their entire network. Stephen has federal connections, and I have something they don't expect, which is... Scott smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. I'm really good at solving problems. And right now, our problem has a name, Carolina Fitzpatrick. The safe house was a modest ranch home in a suburb 40 miles outside the city. Stephen led them through multiple security checks before unlocking the door. Inside, the house looked normal except for the reinforced windows and sophisticated alarm system. We're secure here for maybe 12 hours, Stephen said. After that, they'll find us. Scott was already studying Shannon's documents. Page after page of evidence, bank transfers, coded communications, identity files. It was enough to bring down not just Carolina, but dozens of operatives across the country. This is incredible work, he told Shannon. But it's not enough. What do you mean? Evidence puts them in prison. I want them destroyed. Scott looked up from the papers. Stephen, you said Carolina has been operating for how long? At least 8 years that we know of. Which means she has assets, safe houses, financial networks we can target. Scott's business mind was shifting into high gear. Shannon, you know her patterns, her contacts, her weaknesses. Scott, revenge isn't going to. This isn't revenge. It's war. Scott stood and moved to the wall map Stephen had pinned up. They want to destroy American businesses from inside? Fine. Let's show them what happens when they target the wrong American. Stephen watched his friend with growing concern and admiration. He'd seen this look before, in college when Scott had taken on the corrupt student government, and later when he'd built his consulting business from nothing. Scott, frank in problem-solving mode, was a force of nature. What do you need from me? Stephen asked. Access to your old contacts, unofficial channels, people who might be willing to bend some rules if it means taking down a major espionage network. Shannon moved closer to her husband. And what do you need from me? Scott looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since learning the truth. He saw the woman he'd fallen in love with, but also the spy she'd been forced to become. Both versions were his wife, and both were going to help him win this war. I need you to help me think like them, he said, because we're going to tear Carolina's operation apart piece by piece, and then we're going to make sure she never threatens another American family again. Outside, night was falling. In 12 hours, the hunters would become the hunted. Chapter 4. The Network. Scott spread the documents across the safe house dining table like a general planning a campaign. 3 hours of analysis had revealed something that chilled him. Carolina's operation was far bigger than anyone suspected. Look at this pattern, he said, pointing to a series of bank transfers. She's not just running corporate espionage. She's building a parallel intelligence network inside American businesses. Stephen leaned over the documents. Explain. 37 companies, all Fortune 500, all with employees who've had romantic relationships with people matching Carolina's general profile. Scott's finger traced connections between companies. Defense contractors, tech firms, financial institutions. She's creating sleeper agents throughout the entire American economy. Shannon sat quietly in the corner, her laptop open. She'd been working on something for the past hour, occasionally making soft sounds of recognition or dismay. There's more, she said finally. I've been going through my communication logs with Carolina. She wasn't just my handler, she was coordinating at least 6 other operations. Scott, your consulting firm wasn't the target. It was the command center. What do you mean? Shannon turned her laptop toward them. Your client list includes 17 of the companies on that document. Every security protocol you designed, every vulnerability assessment you conducted, every corporate structure you analyzed, I was supposed to copy it all and send it to Carolina. Scott felt sick. His life's work, his professional reputation built on helping companies protect themselves, had been turned into a weapon against American business. But you didn't send everything, Stephen observed, studying Shannon's communication logs. No, I, I couldn't. Especially after we got married. I started altering the information, making it less useful. Shannon looked at Scott. I told myself I was protecting you, but really I was protecting your clients. These companies trust you. Scott's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Your office. 1 hour. Come alone, or your wife dies. See, Stephen grabbed the phone. It's a trap. Of course it's a trap. Scott was already putting on his jacket. But it's also an opportunity. For what? To get close enough to end this. Shannon stood. Scott, you can't. She'll kill you. Maybe. But first she'll want to gloat. People like Carolina can't resist explaining how clever they are. Scott checked his watch. That gives us 58 minutes to set our own trap. Stephen shook his head. Even if we had a full tactical team. We don't need a tactical team. We need to think like she thinks. Scott turned to Shannon. What does Carolina want most? Control. She needs to feel like she's always 3 steps ahead. And what would make her feel most in control? Shannon considered. Having me there too. She'd want to confront us both. Make us understand how completely she's won. Scott nodded. So we give her what she wants. But first, we make sure she doesn't win. An hour later, Scott stood in his office building's lobby. The place was empty. Carolina had somehow cleared the building without triggering any alarms. Professional work. The elevator took him to his floor in silence. His office door was open, lights spilling into the darkened hallway. Carolina sat behind his desk, looking through his client files. Punctual, she said without looking up. I appreciate that in a man. Where's my wife? Safe. For now. Carolina finally looked at him. You're probably wondering why I didn't just kill you both this afternoon. The thought had occurred to me. Because you created something beautiful here, Scott. Your consulting firm is exactly what we need to expand our operations. American companies trust you completely. They'll tell you anything, show you everything, give you access to their most sensitive information. Carolina smiled. And now that access belongs to us. You want me to work for you. I want you to keep doing exactly what you've been doing. The only difference is that everything you learn gets shared with us. Consider it a consulting fee. Scott moved closer to the desk. And if I refuse, then Shannon dies, and we find another way. Though it would be so much cleaner with your cooperation. I have conditions. Carolina raised an eyebrow. You're hardly in a position to negotiate. I want proof Shannon is alive. I want her freed. And I want your promise that no harm comes to either of us as long as I cooperate. Touching. Very well. Carolina pulled out her phone and made a call. Bring her up. 2 minutes later, the elevator dinged. Shannon emerged with 2 armed men, her hands zip-tied behind her back. But Scott noticed something Carolina missed. Shannon was wearing the blue dress from their first date. The one with the hidden pocket where she used to keep her pepper spray. Shannon caught his eye and gave the slightest nod. Satisfied? Carolina asked. Getting there. Scott reached into his jacket. One more thing. Slowly, one of the gunmen warned. Scott withdrew a thick envelope. Stephen Flynn's complete file on your operation. Names, dates, financial records. Everything the FBI has been building for the past 2 years. Carolina's eyes narrowed. How did you? I told you. I'm very good at solving problems. Stephen's been my friend for 20 years. You think he wouldn't share intelligence if our lives were at stake? Scott placed the envelope on the desk. Here's my counteroffer. You take this information and disappear. Leave the country, shut down your operation, and never contact us again. Carolina laughed. Or I release everything to the press, the FBI, and your superiors in Moscow simultaneously. Your entire network gets burned, and you spend the rest of your life in a federal prison. You're bluffing. Am I? Scott pulled out his phone. I have copies of everything uploaded to 7 different servers with dead man switches. If I don't check in every 12 hours, everything goes live automatically. For the first time, Carolina looked uncertain. She opened the envelope and began reading. Her expression grew darker with each page. This is comprehensive, she admitted. And that's just what Stephen shared with me officially. Imagine what he held back. Carolina stood. Even if this is real, you can't threaten me. I have your wife. Actually, Shannon said quietly, you don't. Carolina spun around just as Shannon's hands came free. The zip ties had been cut, Stephen's work, Scott realized. His friend had been inside the building all along. Shannon's hand emerged from her hidden pocket holding not pepper spray, but a small device Scott recognized, a signal jammer he designed for one of his corporate clients. "All your communications just went dark," Shannon said as the device activated. "Your backup teams can't hear you. Your extraction routes are compromised. And my husband just made you the best offer you're going to get." Carolina's men raised their weapons, but the sound of multiple footsteps in the hallway made them hesitate. Stephen appeared in the doorway with 4 men in tactical gear. "FBI," Stephen called out. "Drop your weapons." Carolina's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, anger, and finally calculation. She was trapped and knew it. "The envelope," Scott said calmly. "Take it and walk away. This is the only offer you'll get." Carolina grabbed the envelope and moved toward the window. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Shannon said. "Because you made one mistake. You let it become personal." Carolina smashed the window with her gun and rappelled down the building's exterior. Her men followed, leaving Scott and Shannon alone with Stephen's team. "She'll be back," Stephen warned. Scott put his arm around Shannon. "I'm counting on it." Chapter 5: Hunter and Prey. Carolina's escape had been too easy. Scott knew it, Stephen knew it, and judging by the way Shannon kept checking the windows of their new safe house, she knew it too. "She's planning something big," Shannon said, closing the curtains. "Carolina doesn't retreat unless she's setting up for a better attack." They'd spent 3 days analyzing everything they knew about Carolina's network. The picture that emerged was terrifying. A sophisticated operation that had been feeding American corporate secrets to Moscow for nearly a decade. Scott's phone rang. Unknown number. "Don't answer it," Stephen warned. Scott answered anyway. "Hello, Carolina." "You're learning." Carolina's voice was amused. "I have a proposition." "I'm listening." "Tomorrow night. The Meridian Building, top floor. Come alone, and I'll show you something that will change how you see this entire situation." "Why would I do that?" "Because if you don't, I'm going to systematically destroy every business you've ever helped protect, starting with Senator Abraham Miner's campaign headquarters." Scott's blood went cold. Abraham Miner was running for president, and Scott's firm had designed the security for his entire campaign operation. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" "Check the news in about 10 minutes. The line went dead. Scott grabbed the remote and turned on the television. 9 minutes later, breaking news flashed across the screen. A cyber attack had crippled Senator Miner's campaign computers, exposing donor lists and strategic documents. "She's escalating," Stephen said grimly. Shannon was already at her laptop. "This is just the beginning. Look at this." She'd pulled up a list of Scott's clients. Defense contractors, financial institutions, tech companies. If she hits them all, it could destabilize entire sectors of the economy. Scott studied the list. Dozens of companies, thousands of employees, millions of customers, all vulnerable because they trusted him to protect them. "I have to go," he said. "Scott, no." Shannon grabbed his arm. "It's obviously a trap." "Of course it's a trap, but it's also a chance to end this before more people get hurt." Stephen shook his head. "She'll kill you the moment you walk in." "Maybe. Or maybe she needs me alive for something." Scott looked at both of them. "Either way, I can't let her destroy innocent companies because of me." "Then we all go," Shannon said firmly. "Absolutely not." "Scott, I know Carolina better than anyone. I know how she thinks, how she plans. You need me there." Stephen sighed. "And you'll need backup. Real backup, not just me and my toy gun collection." Scott realized he was outnumbered. "Fine, but we do this smart. No heroics, no unnecessary risks." The next 24 hours were spent in careful preparation. Stephen reached out to his most trusted former colleagues, a small group of agents who specialized in operations the FBI couldn't officially acknowledge. Shannon worked with Scott to analyze Carolina's psychology and predict her likely strategies. "She'll have the building wired for explosives," Shannon said. "Carolina always has an exit strategy that involves taking her enemies with her." "Then we make sure she doesn't get the chance to use it," Scott replied. At 9 p.m., they approached the Meridian Building. The lobby was dark except for emergency lighting, but the elevator was operational. 37th floor, Stephen reported through their earpieces. Heat signatures indicate at least 6 hostiles, but something's wrong. Wrong how? Too easy. She wants us to come up. The elevator doors opened on the top floor to reveal Carolina standing alone in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. She wore an elegant black dress and held a tablet computer. "Punctual again," she said as they entered. "I do admire consistency." Scott noticed immediately that her men were positioned around the room's perimeter, but none had weapons drawn. Professional courtesy or elaborate trap? "You wanted to show me something," Scott said. Carolina tapped her tablet, and the room's wall-mounted displays lit up with corporate logos, financial data, and organizational charts. "Your life's work," Carolina said. "Every company you've helped, every security system you've designed, every vulnerability you've identified and closed." She smiled. "Do you know what I see when I look at this?" "Tell me." "A man who genuinely cares about protecting people." "It's quite admirable, really. And unfortunately, it makes you completely predictable." The displays change to show real-time security feeds from dozens of corporate headquarters. Scott recognized them all, his clients. "Right now, my associates are positioned at 17 of these locations," Carolina continued. "One word from me, and they'll execute simultaneous attacks. Not just cyber attacks, Scott. Physical ones. Bombs, chemical weapons, targeted assassinations of key executives." Shannon stepped forward. "You're lying. You don't have that kind of reach." "Don't I?" Carolina tapped the tablet again. The displays now showed surveillance footage of specific individuals entering and leaving corporate buildings. "Your friend Richard Osborne at Quanta Dynamics. Billy Gardner at Fortress Financial. Gerard Grace at Titan Technologies. All of them are carrying devices that will level their buildings in approximately." She checked her watch. 14 minutes. Scott felt the trap closing around him. "What do you want?" "Simple. You're going to help me steal something very specific from one very special client. In exchange, I'll call off the attacks." "Which client?" Carolina smiled. "The Pentagon." The room went silent except for the hum of air conditioning and distant city traffic. "You're insane," Stephen said. "Actually, I'm quite rational. Your friend Scott designed the security protocols for a new Pentagon facility that houses some very interesting research. Specifically, research into quantum encryption that could make all current intelligence gathering obsolete." Scott's mind raced. He had worked on a Pentagon project, but it was supposed to be classified at the highest levels. How did Carolina even know about it? "The quantum encryption research," Scott said slowly. "It's not just offensive, it's also offensive. Someone could use it to crack any existing encryption system." "Very good. And imagine what such technology would be worth to certain governments." Shannon shook her head. "Even if Scott wanted to help you, the Pentagon facility is impregnable. It would take a massive operation, or one man with the right access codes and security protocols." Carolina interrupted. "Scott designed the system. He knows every weakness, every backup procedure, every emergency override." Scott looked at the surveillance feeds still playing on the wall screens. Innocent people going about their lives, unaware that they were being targeted because of him. 12 minutes, Carolina announced. "Scott," Stephen's voice was urgent in his earpiece. "My team is in position. We can take her down." Scott held up a hand, still staring at Carolina. "If I agree to help you, you'll call off the attacks?" "I will. And afterward, you disappear. New identities, new lives, enough money to be comfortable anywhere in the world." Carolina's expression softened slightly. "Scott, you're brilliant and you're brave, but you're also idealistic. The world doesn't reward idealism anymore. Help me with this one job, and I'll make sure you and Shannon can build a real life together, free from all of this." It was almost tempting. Almost. "There's just one problem with your offer," Scott said. "Which is?" Scott smiled, and this time it was genuinely warm. "I've never been very good at following orders." He pressed a button on his phone, and suddenly every screen in the room switched to different feeds. Surveillance footage of Carolina's operatives being simultaneously arrested at all 17 target buildings. "Impossible," Carolina breathed. "Not impossible, just well planned." Scott held up his phone. While you were tracking my clients, Steven's friends were tracking your people. While you thought you were setting a trap, we were setting a bigger one. Carolina's hand moved toward her jacket, but Steven's voice cut through the room. FBI. Everyone on the ground. The windows exploded inward as tactical teams rappelled into the conference room. Carolina's men surrendered immediately. They'd been outmaneuvered and knew it. But Carolina herself was gone. In the chaos of the FBI entry, she'd vanished like smoke. Damn it, Steven cursed, looking around the empty room. Scott wasn't worried. She'll be back. How can you be sure? Because this was never about money or research or even espionage. Scott looked out at the city lights. This was about proving she was smarter than us. And we just proved her wrong. Shannon moved to his side. So what happens now? Now we wait. Carolina's operation is blown. Her network is compromised, and her reputation with Moscow is destroyed. Scott put his arm around his wife. But she's still out there, and she'll want revenge. Are you ready for that? Scott smiled. I've been ready since the moment she threatened my family. Chapter 6, The Reckoning. 2 weeks passed in deceptive calm. Carolina's network had been dismantled, her operatives arrested or fled, her financial resources frozen by coordinated international action. But Scott knew better than to believe it was over. Shannon had been officially debriefed by federal authorities and granted immunity in exchange for her complete cooperation. The documents she'd compiled had led to the largest counterintelligence operation in a decade. She was free, legally speaking, but Scott could see the weight of her past still crushing her spirit. You saved a lot of lives, he told her one morning over coffee in their kitchen. They'd returned home after Steven declared it safe, but the house felt different now. Smaller, more vulnerable. I helped put those lives in danger first, Shannon replied quietly. Scott was about to respond when his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Pier 47, midnight. Come alone, or I start killing your clients one by one. See, this time, Scott didn't hesitate. He showed the message to Shannon and Steven. She's desperate, Steven observed. Desperate people make mistakes. Or they become more dangerous, Shannon warned. Carolina has nothing left to lose now. Scott was already formulating a plan. Then we make sure she loses everything. Pier 47 was an abandoned shipping facility on the city's industrial waterfront. At midnight, the place was shrouded in fog and shadow, perfect for a clandestine meeting or an execution. Scott arrived exactly on time, but he wasn't alone, though Carolina wouldn't know that. Steven and his FBI allies were positioned throughout the area, and Shannon was monitoring everything from a surveillance van half a mile away. Carolina emerged from the shadows like a ghost. She looked different, tired, angry, but still dangerous. Her elegant appearance was gone, replaced by tactical clothing and visible weapons. You came, she said. I keep my promises. Unlike some people, Carolina smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Always the moral high ground with you Americans. Do you know what your righteousness has cost me? Not enough, apparently. Everything, Scott. My career, my network, my standing with Moscow gone. And all because you couldn't mind your own business. Scott stepped closer. My business became your business the moment you decided to use my wife against me. Ah yes, your precious Shannon. The devoted wife who spent 3 years lying to your face. Carolina tilted her head. Tell me, how does it feel to know that every intimate moment you shared was part of an intelligence operation? It feels like you don't understand love, Scott replied calmly. Shannon may have started as a spy, but she chose to become my wife. Real choice, real sacrifice. Something someone like you could never comprehend. Carolina's expression darkened. Someone like me? Someone who thinks people are just pieces on a chessboard. Someone who's so empty inside that the only way they can feel powerful is by destroying other people's lives. You think you've won, Carolina said softly. You think dismantling my network was the end game. But Scott, you have no idea what I'm really capable of. She pulled out a tablet and showed him the screen. Surveillance footage of their house, their neighborhood, their favorite restaurants. Recent footage. I've spent 2 weeks learning everything about your life, your routines, your habits. I know Shannon leaves for work at 7:47 every morning. I know you stop at Brewster's Cafe, every Tuesday for their weekly special. I know you visit your mother at the nursing home every Sunday. Scott felt cold dread creeping up his spine. What do you want? I want to watch you suffer the way you made me suffer. I want to take away everything you care about, piece by piece, until you understand what real loss feels like. And then I'll kill you both and disappear forever. Scott had heard enough. Stephen now. Spotlights blazed to life, illuminating the entire pier. FBI agents emerged from concealment positions, weapons drawn. It's over, Carolina, Scott said. But Carolina was laughing. No, Scott. It's just beginning. She dropped the tablet and raised her hands, but Scott noticed something wrong. The tablet was still glowing, still active. Remote detonator, Carolina said conversationally. Did you really think I'd come here without insurance? What did you do? Your consulting firm's office building has been evacuated due to a gas leak. Very convenient timing, wouldn't you say? Except it's not a gas leak. Carolina's smile was purely malicious. It's a bomb, a very large bomb, and in about 30 seconds, it's going to level 6 city blocks. Scott's blood turned to ice. The building housed not just his offices, but dozens of other businesses. Late-night workers, security guards, people just trying to make a living. You're bluffing, Stephen called out. 25 seconds, Carolina replied. Scott made the only choice he could. He lunged for the tablet, but Carolina was ready for him. She drew a knife and slashed at his reaching hand, opening a deep cut across his palm. 15 seconds, she said as they struggled for the device. Scott managed to grab the tablet, but Carolina's knife found his ribs. Pain exploded through his side as he activated the tablet's emergency contact. Shannon, he shouted, get everyone away from the building. 10 seconds, Carolina whispered in his ear. You can't save them all, Scott. You never could. Scott's finger found the detonator control. Instead of disarming it, he changed the countdown, extending it by 10 minutes. Carolina's eyes widened in shock. That's not possible. The system is hardwired. To a system I designed, Scott finished through gritted teeth. I always build in emergency overrides. Stephen's team was already moving, and Scott could hear sirens in the distance as evacuation procedures began. Carolina screamed in rage and plunged the knife toward Scott's chest, but Shannon's voice cut through the night. Get away from my husband. Shannon had left the surveillance van and was running toward them, something metallic glinting in her hand. Not a weapon, the signal jammer from Scott's office. She activated it just as Carolina tried to trigger a backup detonator on her phone. Nothing happened. All your toys just became paperweights, Shannon said coldly. Carolina spun toward Shannon with the knife, but Scott caught her wrist. They fought for control of the blade, but Carolina was trained and Scott was wounded. The knife broke free and arced toward Shannon. Scott threw himself between them. The blade took him in the shoulder, spinning him around. But it also gave Stephen a clear shot. The single gunshot echoed across the water. Carolina Fitzpatrick, Katrina Volkov, fell to the pier and didn't get up. Chapter 7, New Beginnings. 6 months later, Scott stood in the same hospital room where he'd recovered from his stab wounds. This time, he was holding a different kind of life-changing document, Shannon's clean psychological evaluation from the FBI. Officially, you're no longer a security risk, he told his wife. Shannon smiled, but Scott could see the shadows still lingering in her eyes. And unofficially, you're the strongest person I know. They'd both been through intensive debriefing and therapy. The FBI had been thorough in their investigation of Shannon's activities, but her cooperation and the evidence she provided had exonerated her of any serious wrongdoing. She'd been a victim as much as a perpetrator, forced into espionage by threats against her family. Scott's consulting business had survived the bombing attempt. The building had been successfully evacuated, and the bomb had been disarmed with minutes to spare. But he'd made changes. New security protocols, more stringent background checks, and a partnership with Stephen's private security firm to provide additional protection for high-risk clients. Mr. Frank, a nurse appeared in the doorway. There's someone here to see you. Scott frowned. They weren't expecting visitors. The man who entered was tall, gray-haired, and carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Scott recognized him immediately from television. Senator Abraham Minor, the presidential candidate whose campaign had been attacked by Carolina's network. Senator Minor. Scott stood to shake hands. This is unexpected. Please sit down. Minor took the visitor's chair. I wanted to thank you personally. The FBI briefed me on what you and your wife did to stop that espionage network. We were just protecting ourselves. You were protecting the country, Minor corrected. The intelligence Shannon provided led to the arrest of 37 foreign operatives. The quantum encryption research they were trying to steal would have compromised national security for decades. Shannon spoke for the first time. I was part of the problem, Senator. I don't deserve credit for fixing what I helped break. Minor studied her thoughtfully. Young lady, the measure of a person isn't their mistakes. It's what they do to make them right. You risked everything to save your country in your marriage. That takes courage. Scott squeezed Shannon's hand. What can we do for you, Senator? Minor smiled. Actually, I'm here to offer you both something. My campaign security was compromised, as you know. I need people I can trust absolutely. People who've proven they can think like the enemy because they've faced the enemy. You're offering us jobs? I'm offering you a chance to serve your country in a way that uses your unique skills and experience. Minor leaned forward. Scott, your security expertise combined with Shannon's inside knowledge of foreign intelligence operations could prevent future attacks. We need people who understand both sides of this war. Scott looked at Shannon. What do you think? I think. Shannon paused, considering. I think I'd like the chance to do some good with what I learned in the dark. Minor stood. Think it over. There's no pressure, but the offer stands. After he left, Scott and Shannon sat quietly for a long moment. Are you sure about this? Scott asked. I'm sure about you, Shannon replied. And I'm sure I want to spend the rest of my life making up for the damage I helped cause. Scott kissed her forehead. Then let's build something better together. Later that evening, as they drove home through their familiar neighborhood, Shannon noticed something. You're taking the long way, she observed. I wanted to see something. He pulled up to a construction site where a new office building was going up. The sign out front read, Future Home of Frank Security Solutions, protecting American business, preserving American values. You're rebuilding, Shannon said softly. We're rebuilding, Scott corrected. Bigger, better, stronger. And this time, we know exactly who we're protecting ourselves against. Shannon looked at the construction site, then at her husband. Do you think it's really over? With Carolina's network, I mean. Scott considered the question. Carolina's dead. Her operatives are captured or scattered, and her financial network is destroyed. But there will always be new threats, new enemies who think they can hurt innocent people for profit or ideology. And we'll be ready for them. Scott put the car in drive, because now we know something they don't, which is... Scott smiled as they headed home. We know what we're really fighting for. Chapter 8, Final Gambit. Scott had been wrong about one thing. Carolina wasn't dead. The revelation came 18 months later, delivered by Stephen Flynn in a phone call that shattered Scott's carefully rebuilt sense of security. The body at the pier wasn't hers, Stephen said without preamble. Carolina killed one of her own operatives and staged her death. She's been alive this whole time. Scott set down his coffee and moved to the window of his new office. Frank Security Solutions had grown into one of the most trusted consulting firms in the country, largely due to their reputation for stopping the kind of sophisticated attacks Carolina had pioneered. How do you know? Scott asked. Because she's active again. New identity, new network, but same operational style. And Scott, she's targeting your clients again. In the past month, 3 companies that used Frank Security Solutions had suffered precision cyber attacks. Nothing that caused lasting damage, but enough to send a message. Carolina was back, and she was rebuilding. Where is she? We don't know, but we know what she's planning. Stephen's voice was grim. She's assembled a new team, and they're going after the quantum encryption research again. The Pentagon moved it to a new facility after the last attack, but I designed the security for the new facility too, Scott finished. Exactly. She needs you for this job, which means she'll come for you eventually. Scott looked across his office to where Shannon was reviewing security protocols with their newest employee, a former CIA analyst named Judy Joyce. In the months since joining Senator Minor's security team, Shannon had blossomed into a formidable counterintelligence specialist. Her insider knowledge of foreign operations, combined with her genuine desire to protect American interests, had made her invaluable. But it had also made her a target. "Stephen, I need you to get Shannon somewhere safe." "Already tried. She refuses to leave." Scott sighed. He'd expected that. Shannon had developed an almost obsessive need to stay involved in the fight against foreign intelligence operations. It was her way of atoning for her past, but it also put her in constant danger. His computer chimed with an incoming email from an unknown address. Scott opened it to find a single line of text. "Missing me yet?" "See, she's here," Scott said into the phone. "Where?" Scott was already moving toward Shannon's desk. "In the building. She sent this email from our own network." The lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a second later, bathing the office in red light. But in that moment of darkness, Scott had seen something that chilled him, a figure rappelling past the window. "Shannon," he shouted, "get down." The windows exploded inward as smoke grenades filled the room. Through the chaos, Scott heard Shannon cry out, not in pain, but in warning. "Scott, behind you." He spun to find Carolina, emerging from the smoke like a vengeful ghost. She looked different again, older, scarred, but still lethal. The knife wound Stephen had given her on the pier had left a twisted mark across her left cheek. "Hello, darling," she said, raising a pistol. "Miss me?" Scott dubbed behind his desk as Carolina fired. The bullet splintered with inches from his head. "You know, I really should thank you," Carolina called out conversationally as she moved through the smoke-filled office. "Faking my death gave me the perfect opportunity to rebuild my operation without interference. And the scar you gave me? It's quite distinctive. Very useful for intimidating new recruits." Scott could hear fighting in other parts of the office, Shannon and Judy engaging Carolina's team. But his immediate concern was staying alive long enough to help them. "The Pentagon facility," Carolina continued. "I know you designed it. I know you have the access codes. And I know you'll give them to me to save your precious wife." "Wrong again," Scott said, emerging from cover with his hands raised. "I'll give them to you to save myself." Carolina laughed. How refreshingly honest. I was expecting more noble posturing. "I learned something from our last encounter," Scott said, moving slowly toward her. "Fighting you directly is a losing strategy. You're better trained, better armed, and you have more experience with violence. Flattery won't save you." "I'm not flattering you. I'm acknowledging reality." Scott stopped 10 feet away from her. "You want the Pentagon codes? I'll give them to you. But I want something in return. You're hardly in a position to negotiate." "Actually, I am." Scott held up a small device. "Dead man's switch. If my heart stops beating, every intelligence agency in the world gets a complete dossier on your new operation. Names, locations, financial networks, everything." Carolina's eyes narrowed. "You're bluffing." "Am I? You spent 18 months rebuilding in secret. How long do you think it would take those agencies to tear apart everything you've created?" For the first time, Carolina looked uncertain. "What do you want?" she asked. "A fair fight. You and me, no weapons, no backup. Winner takes everything." Carolina laughed. "You want to fight me hand to hand?" "Scott, I could kill you with my bare hands." "Maybe, but if you're so confident, what have you got to lose?" It was a desperate gambit, but Scott was counting on Carolina's arrogance. She'd always believed she was superior to him in every way. The chance to prove it physically would be irresistible. "Very well," Carolina said, setting down her pistol. "But when I win, I get the codes and the pleasure of killing you slowly. And if I win, you won't." They circled each other in the smoke-filled office. Carolina moved like a predator, balanced, confident, dangerous. Scott knew he was outmatched, but he had one advantage. He was fighting for more than just himself. Carolina struck first, a precise blow aimed at his throat. Scott barely deflected it, but her follow-up caught him in the ribs. Pain exploded through his torso as he stumbled backward. "Is this your fair fight?" Carolina taunted. "You're even weaker than I expected." She pressed her attack, raining blows on Scott's defensive position. He managed to block most of them, but each impact sent fresh waves of agony through his body. Then Shannon's voice cut through the chaos. Scott, the jammer. Of course. The signal jammer Shannon had used at the pier, it was still in his pocket from their last security test. Scott activated it just as Carolina lunged for a killing blow. Her attack went wide as every electronic device in the room died, including the targeting system for her backup team's weapons. In the confusion, Scott managed to grab Carolina and throw her against the wall. But she recovered quickly, producing a knife from somewhere. Clever, she snarled, but not clever enough. The knife slashed toward Scott's chest, but this time he was ready. He caught her wrist and used her momentum to throw her across his desk. Computer equipment crashed to the floor as they grappled for control of the weapon. You can't win, Carolina gasped as they fought. Even if you kill me, my team will. Your team is already dead, Shannon said from the doorway. Scott looked up to see Shannon and Judy standing over the bodies of Carolina's operatives. Both women were breathing hard, but neither appeared seriously injured. Carolina's moment of distraction was all Scott needed. He twisted the knife from her grip and pinned her to the floor. It's over, he said. Carolina smiled up at him, blood trickling from the corner of her mouth. You still don't understand, do you? This was never about the Pentagon or the quantum encryption or even money. Then what was it about? Proving that Americans are weak. That your precious values, love, loyalty, honor, make you vulnerable. Carolina's smile widened. And I was right. You could have killed me on the pier, but you hesitated. You could have let the FBI execute me, but you chose capture. Even now, with everything I've done to you and your wife, you won't pull the trigger. Scott looked down at the woman who had turned his life upside down, threatened everyone he cared about, and nearly destroyed his country's security. She was right. He could kill her easily. One quick motion, and all their problems would be over. Instead, he stood up and handed the knife to Shannon. You're right, he said to Carolina. I won't kill you, because I'm not you. Shannon took the knife and knelt beside Carolina. But I will. Carolina's smug expression faltered. You can't. You're not a killer anymore. No, Shannon said quietly. I'm not. But you made one mistake, Carolina. You threatened my family. The knife flashed once, and Carolina Fitzpatrick's war against Scott Frank finally ended. Chapter 9. Justice Served. 3 months after Carolina's death, Scott and Shannon Frank stood in the Oval Office, receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom from Abraham Minor, who had won the election the previous November. For extraordinary service to the national security of the United States, President Minor read from the citation, and for personal sacrifice in the defense of American values and American lives. Scott accepted the medal, but felt conflicted about the honor. Yes, they'd stopped a dangerous spy network and prevented the theft of critical technology. But the cost had been enormous, not just in violence and trauma, but in the person Shannon had been forced to become. After the ceremony, they walked through the White House gardens. Shannon had been quiet all day, and Scott could see the weight of her actions pressing down on her. Regrets? He asked gently. Shannon considered the question. About killing Carolina? No. She would have kept coming until one of us was dead. She paused by a fountain. But about everything else? About the spy I was, the lies I told, the damage I caused before I met you? Every day. You saved more lives than you endangered, Scott said. The intelligence you provided stopped dozens of operations. The network you helped expose prevented attacks that could have killed thousands. Does that balance the scales? Scott took her hand. I don't know, but I know that you chose to do the right thing when it mattered most. And I know that the woman I fell in love with, the real Shannon, not the spy, is the strongest, bravest person I've ever met. They were interrupted by the approach of Stephen Flynn, now the director of a new counterintelligence task force focused on corporate espionage. Sorry to interrupt, Stephen said, but I wanted to give you the final report on Carolina's network. Scott took the folder and scanned the summary. 43 operatives arrested, 17 companies cleared of infiltration, estimated damage prevented, $2.8 billion. Conservative estimate, Stephen replied. The quantum encryption alone was worth more than that to foreign intelligence services. Shannon looked at the numbers. All those people whose lives we saved, and they'll never know how close they came to disaster. That's the job, Stephen said. Keeping people safe without them ever knowing they were in danger. After Stephen left, Scott and Shannon continued their walk. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the White House lawn, and for the first time in months, Scott felt truly peaceful. So what now? Shannon asked. Back to consulting? Back to our normal life? Scott smiled. I don't think we'll ever have a normal life. But maybe that's not such a bad thing. What do you mean? I mean, Frank Security Solutions has a new mission now. We're not just protecting individual companies anymore. We're protecting the entire system. American business, American values, American people. Shannon nodded slowly. A mission worth fighting for. A mission worth living for, Scott corrected. They reached the edge of the garden, where a car waited to take them back to their hotel. Tomorrow they'd fly home to resume their lives, but both of them knew everything had changed. Scott's phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, his blood ran cold. Too many memories of threatening messages from Carolina. But this one was different. It was from Ben Becker, their assistant at Frank Security Solutions. New client wants to meet. Defense contractor with suspected foreign infiltration. Sound familiar? Scott showed the message to Shannon. Ready to get back to work? Shannon's answer was to kiss him, long and deep, in the shadow of the White House. Let's go save the world, she said. Epilogue. 2 years later, Frank Security Solutions had become the premier counterintelligence consulting firm in the United States. Their client list included Fortune 500 companies, government agencies, and foreign corporations seeking to protect themselves from the kind of sophisticated attacks Carolina's network had pioneered. Scott and Shannon worked as a team now, combining his analytical skills with her insider knowledge of intelligence operations. They'd prevented 17 major espionage attempts, identified 43 foreign operatives, and built a reputation as the couple who defeated the most dangerous spy network in American history. But their greatest victory wasn't professional. It was personal. On a quiet Sunday morning, Scott woke to find Shannon in the kitchen, making pancakes and humming softly to herself. Sunlight streamed through the windows of their new house, larger than the old one, with better security but the same warm feeling of home. Good morning, husband, Shannon said, not turning around. Good morning, wife, Scott replied, wrapping his arms around her from behind. It was a ritual they'd developed, a daily reminder that despite everything they'd been through, they'd chosen each other. Every day, they chose each other again. Shannon leaned back against him. Any regrets about the life we left behind? Scott considered the question seriously. Their old life had been simpler, quieter, safer, but it had also been built on lies and maintained through ignorance. This new life, dangerous, complex, demanding, was built on truth and sustained by love. Not one, he said. Shannon turned his arms and smiled. The same radiant smile from their wedding photos, but now earned through trials and sacrifice rather than innocent joy. Good, she said, because I just accepted a new case. International corporate espionage, possible terrorist connections, definitely life-threatening. Scott laughed. Of course you did. We're very good at this, you know. Yes, we are. And in their kitchen, surrounded by the quiet peace of a Sunday morning, Scott and Shannon Frank began planning their next war against the forces that threatened the country and values they'd sworn to protect. Some fights were worth everything. Some victories were worth any cost. And some loves were strong enough to survive anything, even the truth. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.